Okay. Yeah. Welcome everybody to lecture two. So a couple. I don't really have much in the way of pragmatic points to say, other than again, lovely to see you all. Thanks for coming this afternoon. The plan is basically to work through effectively all of TFL today. By the end of this, you are going to be fluent in it, at least grammatically fluent. We won't talk about how to understand when TFL sentences are true or false, but we're going to talk about all of the grammar rules. And that's basically because in order for us to do the machinery to say when it's true and false, we have to make sure that the TFL sentences are properly constructed. Basically, it's a version. Are people familiar with GIGO? So this is a computer science term, sometimes garbage in, garbage out, right? We have to make sure that the stuff we're going to feed into our machinery is in the right format. Otherwise, we just get garbage and nothing works. So we're going to get to do grammar. Yay! Isn't that fun? It's not fun, but it's necessary and actually kind of entertaining. So the plan for today is, and probably the first bit, what we'll do is we'll talk about TFL grammar. So we'll introduce to you all of the parts that will constitute truth functional logic. There's really only three types of parts. The big one is going to be our connectives. Connectives are effectively the tools that let us build up more complex sentences from the atomic elements that we have, the base units, the one-by-one Lego. So we're going to talk through the grammar, and then we're going to pivot about 2/3 of the way through the lecture to a little bit of philosophy of language. And the little bit of philosophy of language is going to be on a distinction that's actually really important, useful in lots of different areas, but it's vital for us because we need it in order to actually state our grammar rules. And that's what we'll do in the very end. We'll state our grammar rules fully and completely. I'm going to give you a complete definition of a sentence in TFL. It's going to be one monster slide. It's going to look hideous. We're not going to necessarily have to memorize it, but it's very important we understand how it works because it explains why we can do the machinery that we're going to talk about in the next lecture. So that's the plan. Sounds good? Or at least not too terrible? That's good enough for me. One thing I forgot to mention beforehand. Do we want to go for a bit and break or push through and end early? Do people have preferences? Sure. That sounds good. So we'll aim to do again a little vibe check about at 3:30. Make sure everyone's like awake and firing still. So yeah, but my preference is always let's just go, get it over with. Go ugly early, I think is the phrase. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about TFL grammar. The place to start is the bit we ended the last lecture with, which is atomic sentences. So atomic sentences are the base unit of TFL. Every TFL sentence has to have at least one atomic sentence in it. They can stand alone, these atoms, or they can be sub-sentences, that is, parts of a bigger, more complex one. And we symbolize atomic sentences with capital letters, possibly with subscripts. So capital A, capital B, capital J, 274, right? All of these are atomic sentences of TFL. And notably, these letters, these atomic sentences, can, if we like, symbolize English sentences. That is, they can kind of stand for English ones, right? We talked a little bit about this in the last lecture. We gave a version of the argumentative structure where we had like, Yabka is asleep. If she's asleep, then she's snoring. So Yabka's snoring. And we did like A, B, da-da-da-da-da, right? Now a symbolization key tells us the mapping. It tells us a mapping between atomic sentences, the letters, and atomic sentences of English. So A stands for Yabka is asleep. H stands for Nathan is hungry. I remember that from the very end of the lecture. A lot of times when we're doing exercises for symbolization, you'll be given a symbolization key. It will tell you, okay, let this letter stand for this English sentence. And then it'll ask you to construct TFL sentences that capture the structure, the logical structure of the relevant English expressions. But sometimes you'll also have to write your own. And we'll talk more about this in the tutorial. Okay, so atomic sentences are capital letters. But how do we build the complex ones? Here are our beautiful toys. There are 5 connectives, and the connectives are the ways that we get the complex sentences. We attach them to atoms, or possibly to other complex sentences, and get bigger and bigger and bigger things. As I say, there are 5. These are the only ones there are in our language. I'm going to talk through them right now quickly. We'll go through them in more detail one by one, but I want to at least introduce them to you right off the top. So this first one, this little weird symbol, right, it looks like a line with a kind of droopy thing at the end, is negation. And it effectively says it's not the case that, or not. So if I wanted to say it's not the case that Nathan's hungry, right, if we have H is Nathan's hungry, we stick the negation in front. Negation H, and that's a way to symbolize not the case that Nathan's hungry. Negation is the only one of 5 that always just attaches to the front of a sentence. It just takes one. The other 4 always have to have sentences on either side. So our second one here is conjunction. It looks like an A, a capital A without the bar in the middle. And it stands for and. It stands for and. That's the easy way to remember it, right? Conjunction is and, just without the A, without the bar in the middle. So if conjunction is and, disjunction is or. And it looks a lot like a capital V. It's strictly speaking not, right? But when you're writing it, it's going to be effectively indistinguishable when you're handwriting it. So it's V because in the classical Latin, it was vel. Vel was a way to say or. And again, for both of these, you'll always have sentences on either side. Yabka's awake or she's sleeping. Yabka's awake and hungry. The and kind of stitches the 2 sentences together. In TFL, it will be capital A, conjunction, capital B, or something like that. So our 4th one is the conditional. We talked about this yesterday in the tutorial. The conditional is a way to say if then. The one in the front is the if. The one in the back is the then. Right? Or to use the terminology, we'll talk again about it in a moment, the antecedent is the one in the front. The antecedent, ante meaning from before or prior. The one on the right is the consequent, the upshot, the result, the consequence. Again, don't stress about the terminology. We'll talk about it more in a second. And then the last one is the biconditional. And the biconditional is the way to say if and only if. And that should look a little familiar. Where have we seen this expression before?
In the definition of affiliate?
Yeah, in fact, all of our definitions, right? We've used if and only if. So secretly, I've been indoctrinating you about how to use the biconditional already. Just as to spoil something that we'll talk about probably in about 20 minutes, the biconditional is literally just conditionals going in both directions. It is a biconditional. So these are the connectives. This is it. By taking all of these and starting with atoms, we can build up to any TFL sentence. And the language is actually extremely simple. Capital letters and a bunch of these. That's it. That's all she wrote. And some brackets to help us figure out where the units are. Of course, the difficulty here is going to be making sure that when we use these connectives, we use the right one in the right way to get the mapping correctly. To go back a slide, remember when we're talking about a symbolization key, we want to try and map English sentences on to TFL sentences. Well, it's real easy if we're mapping atomic English sentences. But when we start to map complex English sentences, like if Yobka's awake, then she's hungry, we're going to have to start using our various connectives. So that's going to be the big task for symbolizing into TFL, making sure that we're using the right symbol in the right place. So let's talk about them. Our first one is negation. So let's have, this is Rex. Rex has an identity problem, right? So we'll let C be Rex is a cat. If we wanted to symbolize Rex is not a cat, well, the first thing we could do is we could actually paraphrase this sentence in English. Now, it's important to note, does everyone know what I mean when I say paraphrase? What does it mean to paraphrase? Strictly speaking, yes. Yes, right? So we're not going to change the meaning, but we change the surface grammar. So we can paraphrase this Rex is not a cat in English to it's not the case that Rex is a cat. That is, there's no difference in meaning between this and this English sentence. And when we translate it, when we paraphrase it like this, we can say, cool. To go back a slide, I said that negation roughly says it's not the case that, so wham bam, we can symbolize Rex is not a cat as negation C. And more generally, we can say a sentence can be symbolized as negation if it can be paraphrased in English as it's not the case that. Now, one thing to note about paraphrasing is we need to be very careful when we're doing it. To give you an example, because I think this is something a little bit easier with examples. Take Amanda is happy and Amanda is unhappy. It's very natural to hear Amanda is unhappy as it's not the case that Amanda's happy. But that's strictly speaking incorrect. And we can see that it's incorrect because we can recognize that these two aren't exhaustive. Amanda can be neither happy nor unhappy. She can just be meh. That is, there's a gap between happiness and unhappiness. Or to put it another way, Amanda is not happy and Amanda is not unhappy can both be true. Because she's just meh. Yes?
How does that apply to the definition of dead and undead?
Good. Difficult. Undead is weird because that seems to suggest that there is a third kind of state, right? Thankfully, there's nothing that's undead. But that's kind of tracking the idea, right? In that weird circumstance, if we can come back, what it is unlive, right, then we couldn't treat dead as not alive. So that's kind of the point here. When we're thinking about how to use negation, we have to be careful, right? Un-blah isn't always the same as negation, the sentence without the un. Another really good example of this is the problem with inflammable. Do people know what inflammable means?
It means it's flammable.
Yeah, it can catch fire. This is why people don't, the suggestion is not to use this word anymore, because people hear it and think, oh, this means it's not possible for it to catch fire. It's not flammable. Oh no, why am I burning? So, okay, again, important thing here is when we're using our negation, when we're doing the symbolizing, we have to be careful. Careful with your paraphrasing, be careful with your symbolizing. So, that's negation. Let's move on to our next one, conjunction. So, we have Yobka is a dog, and this is my other old dog, Vlekia. Right? So we have Yobka and Vlekia. And suppose we want to symbolize the sentence, Yobka is a dog and Vlekia is a dog. Well, that's easy. We take J for Yobka is a dog, V for Flecky is a dog. We stick a conjunction in the middle, and wham bam, we have this sentence. It is a conjunctive sentence. Now, strictly speaking, we should also put brackets whenever we use a conjunction, a disjunction, a conditional, or a biconditional. Now, I'm very quickly going to relax this because, between friends, I'm lazy. But it's useful to get in good habits. If you insert one of these in the middle, stick brackets. It makes it clear what the units are. Do as I say, not as I do. Now, some terminology. This is a conjunction. This sentence is a conjunction, and the two parts are conjuncts. And this is very helpful terminology because we can start talking about the truth values of the conjuncts, determining the truth value of the conjunction. That is, what's true about the parts, and then what does that tell us about the whole? Now note, we can use this form is really obvious with a conjunction, but that's not the only form that we could track with a conjunction. We might have Nathan is smart and handsome, right? That could be treated as a conjunction. Or Bert and Willem are both stylish. Although Hoob's tall, he's not a basketball player. Or Byron's good at squash, but Alfred is better. All of these sentences can be symbolized using conjunction. So, fairly straightforward. I haven't given you the symbolization key, but I hope it's reasonably clear. We can treat Nathan is smart and handsome basically as Nathan is smart and Nathan is handsome. Paraphrase it back into the form we had before. Or similarly, Bert and Willem are both stylish. This can be paraphrased as Bert is stylish and Willem is stylish. Much the same form we had before. And you can see how these also go. Now our third example highlights something useful. Mentioned it already, but this is making it explicit. When we put these things in, it doesn't always have to just be atoms. The things that we're connecting can also be complex sentences. So we have Hoob is tall, and it's not the case that Hoob is a basketball player. That's a way for us to symbolize this. And then lastly, we have Byron's good at squash, but Alfred is better at squash. Byron's good, Alfred is better. So we can then say a sentence can be symbolized as brackets, conjunction, close brackets. It can be paraphrased in English as both and, but, or although. Different ways to get to this same logical form. Cool. Good so far? Okay. 2 out of 5. Doing well. Let's do number 3. Disjunction. Disjunction. This is the V. If conjunction is the A without the bar, disjunction is it flipped around. Disjunction is a way to say or. So we can symbolize either Amanda will take a nap or she will come to the party. Let's have N be Amanda will take a nap. P be Amanda will come to the party. Well, cool, N, disjunction, P. And if we're being strict, there should be brackets on the outside, but I'm going to be quite happy if you don't leave, if they're not there. And again, to have some terminology, this sentence is a disjunction. And the parts, the constituent parts, are the disjuncts. So it's very similar with the previous one, right? It was a conjunction with conjuncts. This is a disjunction with disjuncts. Again, ways for us to talk about it. So this is one version of the sentence. We can also symbolize this kind of thing. Either Alf or Hoob will play football with me. We can paraphrase this as either Alf will play football with me or Hoob will play football with me. And then we can see again, it's clear, we can stick the disjunction in. So we get the rule. A sentence can be symbolized as disjunction, if it can be paraphrased in English as either or. Okay. Now, One other thing to note about or is that English allows for two different senses of or. And in fact, frequently in English, we use the exclusive. So the exclusive or effectively excludes the possibility of both options. Here's the easy way. You'll see this on like menus, right? You'll say like, okay, the menu is such that you can have an appetizer or a dessert. And what it's saying is, right, if you pick the main, you can either pick the appetizer or you can take the dessert, but you can't take both, you greedy bastard. Similarly, people will offer you coffee or tea. You're kind of a dick if you take both, right? You're violating something like the social norm. The suggestion is that you're only supposed to take at most one. That's an exclusive or. Contrast that with an inclusive or. An inclusive or says, hey, take at least one, maybe both. Either Alf or Hoob will play football with me. Hey, it's even better if they both show up. So exclusive, again, at most one option, definitely not both. Inclusive, at least one option, possibly both. Our disjunction, the V, always, 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 always symbolizes the inclusive or. I'm going to tell you a way to symbolize exclusive or. It's not going to be using this connective. We're going to have a more complex sentence structure to capture it. But whenever you see this, we're always going to read it as inclusive. Okay. How are we feeling so far? Negation, conjunction, disjunction? Feel sort of okay with them? Okay. Yes?
With the example, either Amanda will take a nap or she will go to the party. That's exclusive.
Yeah. So in theory, right, it's really easy to read this English sentence as suggesting a kind of exclusive option. But strictly speaking, nothing about this sentence by itself prevents her from taking a power nap and then hitting the party up after. Yeah, right? So this is again, English is slippery. And there's a really interesting thing in philosophy of language explaining, in some sense, why we have the feeling that you just expressed. Right? When someone tells us a disjunction, we often hear it in the exclusive way. And people need to then say, oh, no, but it could be both too. But because we're, at least as logicians, being super shallow and pedantic, we say, ha ha ha, it's inclusive, nothing prevents this from being such that it's both, until you include the, oh no, but it's only one or the other, not both. Good. So, yes?
But that does not prevent someone from ordering tea after coffee, right?
Yes. So what we're really doing when we're relying on the kind of exclusive word here is something like social convention to say, you greedy bastard, you can only have one, the other, not both. Convention is basically building in the exclusivity. But the strict offer, go nuts, right? Yeah. Yes?
So for the disjunction, it's always inclusive or?
Always.
Exclusive or is like negating conjunction.
Good. Give me 2 more slides. We're going to come to it. We're going to talk about how to do it in just a second. Right? So next thing I want to do is talk about the 3 that we have, negation, conjunction, and disjunction. We're going to talk a little bit about how they play together. This is also going to come back to your question about where we put negation. Right? Oh, no, did we die? Okay, so here's my little interlude about the interplay between these 3. Suppose I want to say it's not the case that both Hoob and Alfred are going to play football with me. So it's not the case that they're both going to play. So if I have H as Hoob will play football with me, and A as Alfred will play football with me, it's very direct, remembering the rule we had a second ago about conjunction, that we can symbolize both Hoob and Alfred will play as H conjunction A. But then how would I get to symbolize this sentence? What's missing? What's the last step?
You put a negation before it fits the brackets.
Yeah, before the brackets. And this is telling me it's not the case that the conjunction is true. That is, it's not the case that they're both going to play. Now, if it's not the case that they're both going to play, what could still happen?
Either one of them could play, or they could both not play.
Yeah, right? So this is compatible with Alfred showing up and Hoob staying home. It's also compatible with Hoob showing up, Alfred staying home, or both of them leaving me sitting there at the field by myself. This just says it's not the case they're both going to rock up. Okay? So this says it's not both. Not both. How about if I want to say, Hoob will not play, but Alfred will? How would I symbolize this? Again, we've got H for Hoob will play, A for Alfred will play. How would I say, Hoob will not play, but Alfred will? Yeah?
The brackets and negation, the H, and then reverse VA and then bracket.
Nice, right? So we'll say it's not the case Hoob will play, conjunction, Alfred will. Not H, conjunction A. Now note, and this is the important part, where the negation is attaching. Right? In the top sentence, it's telling me, hey, you know what's false? This conjunction. The thing in the brackets is false. Down here, though, it's not saying that. It's saying H is false. Yes?
Yeah, my question specifically concerned the fact that when you put the above one, when it's in front of the brackets, or the difference between putting both of them in negations within the brackets.
Yeah, we're going to come to that in I think the next slide. Right? Yeah, good. So what I want to really stress, though, is the difference here. Do we see the grammatical difference and how the negation's working? This is the first, most important bit for our grammar thing to go. So I'll give you a term to talk about here. What we have is a difference in scope. The scope, we'll define this at the very end of the lecture, but the scope of a connective is the sentence that it controls, that it is the main operator of. So in this sentence, the negation is the main operator. It has the biggest scope. It controls the whole sentence. Right? That's our top one. In this one, the conjunction has the big scope, and negation has a narrower scope. It's only attached to a sub-sentence, a smaller part. So scope is basically how much do you control? The main operator of a sentence controls the whole thing. Smaller operators have narrower scope. They control less. Yes, you had a question. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I just want to know. No, not mine.
It's okay. Maybe it'll come back. Yeah. So again, we're thinking about it. Wide scope means the widest scope is the whole sentence. Narrower scope is going to be some sentence, some smaller part of the whole thing. Again, we're going to talk more about this. It's just helpful to have this kind of flashed up already. So, next bit, I want to try a few examples using negation, conjunction, and disjunction. Right? So we're going to try 3 different sentences. So here's our first one. Either you will have dessert, either you won't have dessert or you won't have an appetizer. I put them in slightly grammatical, weird, difficult form to make it very explicit. Either you will not have a dessert or will not have an appetizer. So basically this is my wife telling me you've got to stick to the diet, right? So if we have D as you have dessert and A you have an appetizer, how would we symbolize this? Either you will not have a dessert or not an appetizer?
not the, and then an or, and then not.
Yeah, right? So can we see it? Right? Either it's not the case you'll have dessert, or it's not the case that you'll have an appetizer. Yes?
It's different to put like negation brackets and then they, let's say, like not like twice. I mean the negation twice.
Yeah, good. So we'll think about this. This was your question, right? So let's pause for a second, right? And I'm going to come back to your suggestion. In this case, you will have, either you will not have dessert or not have an appetizer, right? What is this equivalent to? Yeah.
Not having both.
Yeah, not having both, right? It's equivalent to not having both. So what would be another way we could symbolize this one?
Not brackets delay.
So either not is equivalent to not both. And I'll put that on the board because it's helpful. Is the same as so you can symbolize that either like this or like this. These, for the point of view of TFL, mean the same thing.
So there was a thing in the correction book that said just one. That was wrong while I was confused.
Yeah. So importantly, the solutions book it's only ever going to give single options, but almost always, there's going to be multiple possibilities here. From the point of view of TFL, these are the same. So, right, either not having a dessert or not having an appetizer is the same as not having both an appetizer and a dessert. In fact, what's the only way that both of these would be false? How is it that I could violate my wife's command? What's the one way that these would be false? Yeah, right? I totally break the diet and I have an appetizer, a main, and a dessert. Beautiful. Okay, good for the first one? Now let's think about the second one here. Our second one, we have neither coffee nor tea. We have neither coffee nor tea. I'm fresh out of hot drinks. I'm real sorry, guys. If we have C as we have coffee, and T we have tea, how would we symbolize this? Yeah?
Not C and not T.
Okay? I'm liking it. So let's think. If we're going to go from TFL back to English, how would we say this in English? So one way might be we have neither coffee nor tea. What would be another natural way to express this in English?
We don't have coffee or we don't have tea.
Yeah, right? To be slightly awkward in the English, right? Both and not right? Let's suggest one more option. Yes.
I don't really understand the phrasing of the first two. Because when you say you will not have P or P and I didn't say you will not have D and A, why would it be described as either not A, not B?
Good.
Like how it's written down.
So let's think about these two, right? I'll make it explicit. So if we take the not both, this is effectively right. My wife tells me, hey, look, whatever you do, you can't have both an appetizer and a dessert.
Yes.
Now, to comply, I could either have the appetizer and no dessert, or have the dessert and no appetizer, or, which never happens, I don't do either. Right? But note the way I said that right at the end. I don't do either. That is another way of saying either it's not the case that I have the appetizer, or it's not the case that I have the dessert. Possibly, again, I'm abstemious and just have the main. That's the kind of idea between these two. There are two different ways to come at the same situation. At least one of these is letting us down, possibly both. Another example helps. Right? Not both Alfred and Hoob are going to come play football. That's compatible with Alf showing up. That's compatible with Hoob showing up. That's compatible with both of them just leaving me hanging. At least one is going to let me down, maybe both. At least one is going to let me down, maybe both.
Yes.
Two different structures for the same idea. It's good, it is confusing. Let's draw a big line here. I've come back again to the both, not, and not. Sorry, can everybody see that? I know it's kind of awkward because of the light and everything too, so we're delicate balancing act. But let's think. In this case, they're both going to let us down. So what would be another way we could say this? If they're both going to let us down, then what must also be false?
One of them is showing up.
Right? So it's also going to be false that at least one of them is showing up. So how would I say at least one of them is showing up?
Or CO2.
These two are the same. I'll blank the screen for a second so we can actually make it a little bit easier to see. Our top pair are two different ways to say at least one option is going to let us down. Our bottom pair are two different ways to say, oh, everybody's letting us down. This tells us it's not the case that even one of them is going to be there for us. And this tells us, hey, both. Again, the important things here, starting to play around with where we can put the negations and how it's giving us different sentences. An easy way to look at it is the difference between these two. One of them tells us, hey, the conjunction's false, and the other is a conjunction of two falsities. And don't stress if it's not quite clicking yet. We're going to do a hell of a lot of fucking practice problems to practice on it. Just kind of getting going. Cutting our teeth. Okay, so coming back. Almost a disaster. Almost hit the screen off there for a second. So how will we do? We have neither coffee nor tea. We've got two different options for it. Here's one. Not tea or tea. This will only be true if we don't have coffee and we don't have tea. Now, most important bit of advice I'm going to give you. Here's a sentence. You'll have either a beer or a mixed drink, but not both. You'll have either a beer or a mixed drink, but not both. If we have B as you have a beer, and M as you have a mixed drink, how would we symbolize this? Yeah.
With an exclusive or.
Yeah.
Or we can also do it in the size.
Yeah, so we're going to do it with the symbols we have, right? Because we're restricted to those. So let's think about it. How would we do it? How do we do it?
It's B, it's B or M in brackets, and then an and then a not BN.
right? So we look at the whole sentence. The main operator in the English is the but, right? And one half of it is you'll have either a beer or a mixed drink, so B or M. And the second half is not both. And I just did a hell of a baloo about how to say not both, right? So we stitch the two together. Either you'll have a beer or a mixed drink, and it's not the case that you will have both. And this is how we symbolize exclusive or statements. We have a structure along these lines. We don't have a single symbol. The symbol is always going to be the inclusive or. We have to use a structure like this. Cool. Okay. So, we did 3 out of the 5. How we feeling so far? Kind of making sense? Okay. Yes, please.
I don't understand the last one.
Okay. It's okay. So again, let's think about it at the layer of English first, right? The English first. It's got 2 sentences that make up the whole thing. The first half says, you'll have either a beer or a mixed drink. So if we think just about that part, we know how to do that. That's just either beer or mixed drink. That's B or M. But the second part of the big English sentence tells us it's not the case that you have both.
Oh, so it negates the fact that you can have 0. So that's why you have to write down like that.
Well, so this, right? This part here says, hey, I'm going to be true if you have at least a beer or a mixed drink. This part's compatible with you, and then ending up in disaster. Right. The second part tells us, right, no going nuts, party monster, right? You can either have your beer or you can have your gin and tonic, but you better not have both. And the 2 together give us the full English sentence. That's the trick. Okay. Good so far? How are we doing? We okay with pushing on, or do we want to take a little break? That's fine. Yeah. Why don't we take a little break? So it's 28 according to this. Why don't we come back at 38? So 10 minutes. Is that okay? Cool. Okay.